We continue now at the top of Daf Yadalit Amud Aleph and Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 14a. On the previous summit, Rabbi Yossi said in the Mishnah, by the Shtei Alechem and Shavuos, if one were to slaughter the two lambs and have a pigul intention in mind for just one of the loaves, and the same thing with the Lechem Aponim, if he burns the bazich and the levona of the Lechem Aponim and he has in mind for one of the arrangements of the bread a pigul intention, so then only that loaf, only that arrangement of bread is going to be pigul, the other will not be pigul. And Rav Huna said on the Mishnah that Rabbi Yossi would say the same thing when it comes to an animal carbon, if he has in mind the pigul intention for the right thigh and not for the left thigh of the animal, so only the right thigh is going to become pigul and not the left thigh. And on the previous summit, Rav Nachman asked a question against Rav Huna from a Brais, so the Brais is also talking about the Shtei Alechem, and it says that in terms of the kazayas, the intention of pigul has to be for a kazayas, that can come from both of the loaves together. In other words, a half a zayas from one loaf and a half a zayas from another loaf can combine by the Shtei Alechem, and we'll say that that does in fact render it pigul in such a situation. And so Rav Nachman asked Rav Huna, if you're going to say that by the case of the animal carbon, by the zevach, that we would say that the right thigh and the left thigh essentially do combine, pigul on the right thigh is going to make pigul on the left thigh, the idea would be that since it all stems from one animal, from one carbon, therefore it combines, so then we can understand that Rabbi Yossi would say the same thing when it comes to the Shtei Halechem. One would be able to combine an intention of pigul, a half a zayis from this loaf and a half a zayis from that loaf. But if you're going to say in Rabbi Yossi, that Rabbi Yossi goes so far as to say even by an animal carbon that it's considered too independent, meaning the right thigh is independent from the left thigh, so then mitzdarfi, would we then say that we combine the half a zayis from this loaf and the half a zayis from that loaf? That would not make sense. As Rashi explains, if you're going to say by the thighs, since they come from one body, but still trei gufeininu, but they're still considered to be separate. And you're going to say that if there's a pigul intention for this one, meaning on that thigh, without that one, so again, only the one you had intention for is going to be pigul, if we're going to say that. So then by the loaves, the Shtei Halechem and Shavuos, ki ervon lechol kazayis mishtein, if he's going to mix them, combine them with that intention, tita kazayis from both of them outside of the proper time, mi mitzdarfi, would we combine in that case? Mi mahanya erov machshavto lemahave chad gufa tvei michibor zevach, would the mixing, so to speak, of his intention make it like one unit more than the actual carbon, which is all one animal, delo mahani luhule rotzos, where it's not going to be effective in that case? And the Gersa of the Mesoras Hashah says lehitztare, if it's not going to be effective to combine, of course we wouldn't say that, and so that's why that's a question against Rav Huna. Again, as the Gemara says, aliyamr trei gufeinin, if you're going to say that the two thighs are considered independent units, mi mitzdarfi, would we say by the Shtei Halechem that we would combine again a half a zayis from this one and a half a zayis from that one? And so that's a question against Rav Huna's understanding of Rabbi Yossi. And the Gemara continues and answers, Mani, who is the author of this brisa? Rebbe, it's actually Rebbe, and therefore it's not a question against Rabbi Yossi. Rashi explains, Rebbe, Rabbi Yossi, lo ayri behu, Rabbi Yossi is not dealing with that, velo tikshi lo Rav Huna, therefore it's not a question against Rav Huna's understanding of Rabbi Yossi. And the Gemara brings Rebbe the Tanya, as we learned in the following brisa, hashochet es hakeves lechol chatzi zayis mechalazu, if one slaughters the lamb to eat a half a zayis from this loaf, v'chein chavero, and then the other one lechol chatzi zayis mechalazu, to eat a half a zayis from the other loaf. Rebbe says, Omer ani, I say, shezeh kosher, that is kosher, meaning to say, it is not pigul. Rashi explains, lechol chatzi zayis mechalazu l'mocher, this is a pigul intention, he's going to eat a half a zayis from this loaf tomorrow, outside the proper time. So Rebbe says, shezeh kosher, this is kosher, meaning lahaktir, a murav, one is still able to burn the sacrificial portions of the animal, v'lechol basar, and eat the meat, to halochishav ela chatzi achila, b'chatzi mater, because he's only thinking about a half a consumption, because again it's a half a zayis for half of the matir, and that's why in this situation we would say kosher. And so the Gemara now continues and says, Taimu do'amar chatzi chatzi. The reason over here is because it was half-half, aval amar kazayis mishtein, but if you would say a kazayis from both of them, so apparently mitzdar, if it would combine. And Rashi explains, aval amar kazayis mishtein, meaning the irvon lechalos b'machshavto, let's say he would combine the two loaves in his intention. V'yamar b'chol echad v'yechad min hakvasim, he would say, by every one of the sheep as he's slaughtering, hareini shocher al manas lechol kezayis mishtein, b'shtein. The way he would phrase it is, I'm slaughtering this animal on the condition to eat one kazayas combined from both of them, l'machar tomorrow, mitzdarfi, they would combine. And so you see that Rebbe would say it combines in that situation. And so essentially we are answering that that's exactly what the Brisa was saying on the previous Amud, that a kazayas mishtein is mitzdarif. And again, it's not going to be a question against Rav Huna's understanding of Rabbi Yossi, because we're saying the Brisa is Rebbe and not Rabbi Yossi. But the Gemara still continues and asks, this doesn't really help, because for Rebbe Ali B'Daman, we could still ask, which Tana is Rebbe following? There was a machlokas Tanoim in our Mishnah between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yossi, and again, according to Rabbi Yossi, in general, Rabbi Yossi says that we say that the pigel only applies to that one loaf if that's the intention. The Rabbanan say it applies to both, and so who's Rebbe following? Now, if Rebbe is following the Rabbanan, afilu ba'achas mehanami, that can't be, because even in one of them, if there's that intention, we say there's pigel by both of them. And Iyaliba de Rabbi Yossi, and if you're going to say Rebbe follows Rabbi Yossi, so then Hadra Koshin Laduchte, we're right back to our question, because again, Rebbe is following Rabbi Yossi, and within Rabbi Yossi, you see that Rabbi Yossi does combine that intention. As Rashi explains, Rebbe Aliba de Man, Amr Loham Masnisan de Katani Lael, again, that Mishnah that we just had earlier, the Mishnah on the previous summit, who's Rebbe following in that Mishnah? Liola Meino Chayvat Shiafagel B'Shtein B'Chazayas B'Shtein in B'Echad Mehen Lo. Again, he's saying one is only chayiv if he has a pigel intention in both of them b'kazayas, and only in both of them and not in one of them. So who is he following? Ela aliba de Rabbi Yossi. You're going to have to say he follows Rabbi Yossi. Amr is following Rabbi Yossi. V'katani de mitzdarfos achalas. And we're saying even according to Rabbi Yossi, there is an ability to combine the loaves. V'hadra koshin laduchta. So our question just goes right back to its place. Di'amr b'shlama yurechos chargufu. Again, if you're going to say within Rabbi Yossi that by the thighs, the case of the right thigh and the left thigh, we say since it all came from one animal, therefore it combines to one unit, then you can understand why also over here, Rebbe would say it combines to one unit. And the Gemara continues and answers, Liolam aliba de Rabbanan. Actually, Rebbe is following the Rabbanan, and again, then the question is, the Rabbanan in the Mishnah said that if one were to slaughter the two lambs and have an intention of pigel for one of the loaves, then actually they would both be pigel. And so therefore, what does it even mean in the Brisa? The language of the Brisa was, Ad sheyefagel b'shtehen b'kazayas. He has to have that pigel intention for both of them, for both of the loaves b'kazayas, but that's not actually true. Just one of the loaves is enough. How do we understand the Brisa? And the Gemara is actually going to change the understanding of the Brisa completely. Velotema ad sheyefagel b'shtehen. The language of the Brisa really is not b'shtehen, which is the feminine, that would refer to the loaves, the shtei alechem. Eloema ad sheyefagel b'shnehen. What the Brisa actually says is that the pigel intention has to be by both of them in the masculine, meaning referring to the animals, and we're talking about the pigel intention by the slaughtering of both of the animals. Va'afilu bi'achas mehen. And in terms of the pigel intention of consuming it outside the proper time, it actually is even by just one of the loaves, not both of the loaves, because again, we are following the Rabbanon. And the real point of this Brisa, ulafukim mid Rabbi Meir, it's going against Rabbi Meir, Diamar mefaglin b'chatzi matir. Rabbi Meir says that one can create pigel by half a matir. Again, when it comes to pigel, there are two stages. There's the stage in time when the person is having the intention. In this case, that's by the slaughtering of the animals. Rabbi Meir would say even just slaughtering one of the two animals, you can have that intention, and that creates pigel, but that the Rabbanan disagree with. They say you have to have that intention by the slaughtering of both of the animals, and then there's the other stage in terms of what you're having the intention for. In this case, it's the intention to consume the loaves outside of the proper time. In that regard, the Brisa holds it could just be one loaf, and then both loaves actually will become pigel, following the Rabbanan in our Mishnah. And again, Kamash Malandalo, the Brisa is teaching us it is not the case like Rabbi Meir. We don't hold mefaglin b'chatzi matir. You have to have that intention of pigel during the entire matir, in this case again, during the slaughtering of both of the animals. And Rashi explains, Liolam aliva de Rabbanan, really this Brisa is following the Rabbanan. And then the question is, so even one loaf it should be pigel. Lo tema b'shtehen, don't say b'shtehen in the feminine, because it is true, even one of them, both loaves become pigel. It's in the masculine, meaning by both hakvasim, by both the lambs. Even in a situation of a kazayas, meaning an entire kazayas, he says he's going to have outside the proper time, meaning the shachat beis kavasim, he slaughtered both lambs, al menas lechol kazayas mechal achas, with the intention to eat a kazayas from one loaf, omi beis chalos, or it could be from two loaves. Avolim chishev bekeves echad, but if he had an intention by just one lamb, lechol kazayas echad min hachalos, to eat one of the kazesim of the chalos outside the proper time, uveshchitas ha'acher lo chishev, but in the slaughtering of the other lamb, he didn't have that intention, lo have a pigel, that would not be pigel, dein mefaglin, but avodas chatzi mater. There's no pigel by the avoda of a half a matir. And Rashi continues, Ulafuke mid Rabbi Meir Da'amar, this goes against Rabbi Meir, who says, Besof masnisin mefaglan ba'avodas chatzi matir. He says there is pigul by the avoda of a half a matir to katani, because it says, Shachat echad min hakavosim lechol shtei chalos l'machar. Let's say he slaughters one of the lambs to eat the 2 chalos tomorrow outside the proper time. Rabbi Meir, Omer pigul, Rabbi Meir says pigul, because he says mefaglan b'chatzi matir, v'chayav and all of kares, and there is a liability to kares. And Rashi now goes on and clarifies, and this is an important Rashi, because he's going to clarify the various elements of mefaglan b'chatzi matir. V'ikash, if you're going to ask the following question, hakometz as hamincha, what about the case we had earlier? Someone takes the kometz, he takes the fistful of the karban mincha, amai posel b'machshavto. So why over there do we say there's the disqualification? Why over there is it pigul, according to the Rabbanan? Ha'avodas chatzi matir, who isn't that also chatzi matir? That's a case where the lavona also is part of the matir. He's just having in mind by the taking of the kamitza, the fistful. To'ikonami lavona. What about the lavona that is also one of the matirs? Why isn't that a problem of mefaglan b'chatzi matir? So Taretz, for that we can answer b'kamitza vaday avoda shleimohi, by taking the fistful that is a full avoda. The haleka kamitza b'lavona, because the lavona there is no kamitza, there's no fistful by the lavona. And Rashi continues and says, Teda, you should know this is true. The habahaktaras kometz, because by the burning of the kometz, imchishav lechol shirayim l'machar. Let's say he burns the kometz with intention to eat the remainder of the karban mincha tomorrow outside the proper time. Pligi Rabbanan. The Rabbanan actually do argue over there. V'yamri, and they say, Kevan de'ikonami haktaras lavona. There is the burning of the lavona. There's no fistful taken by the lavona, but there is a burning of the lavona. So therefore, lo chashiva haktaras kometz lefagel. Therefore, the haktaras kometz, the burning of the kometz, is not important enough in order to create pigul. That is a problem of mefaglan b'chatzi matir. In other words, if at the time of the taking of the kometz, the taking of the fistful, there is no taking a fistful of lavona, it's just taking a fistful of the flour, so that's like a complete avod. That's not an issue of mefaglan b'chatzi matir. But let's say by the burning of the kometz, that is an issue of mefaglan b'chatzi matir, because there's the burning of the lavona as well, that is part of the matir. The katani masnis and pigel b'haktoras kometz v'lo b'lavona, that's what it says. If there would be a pigel intentioned by the burning of the kometz and not the lavona, but it says v'chachamim on main pigel achi yafagel b'chol matir. The chachamim say there's no pigel unless there's the pigel intention in the entire matir. And Rashi continues and asks, Vikash, if you're going to ask, Ho kimna breish pirkin, didn't we say earlier in the perek, L'kuli alma, that according to everyone mefaglan b'chatzi matir, that there's pigel by chatzi matir? To katani, because we learned earlier, hakometz al manas lahakter kometz l'moch, if someone takes the fistful with the intention to burn the kometz tomorrow, moder Reb Yossi, there Reb Yossi admits, there everybody agrees that it's pigel, v'harelo chishav ela al chatzi matir, but isn't that an intention about a half a matir? Meaning al haktoras kometz, on the burning of the kometz, and again that's a half a matir, because there's also the burning of the lavona. But Rashi says, la pirchi, that's not a question. Delo dami lahai dahacha, that's not similar to the case over here, which we're calling chatzi matir by one of the 2 lambs. Dahasam chishav al chatzi matir, there he has intention about a half a matir. B'shas avoda shlema, at the time that he's doing a full avoda, he's taking the kmitza. Again, the taking of the kmitza, the fistful, is considered a full avoda, and then he's having intention about a half a matir, that again, the kometz is going to be burned, it's going to be consumed outside of the proper time, and there is another matir, there's the lavona being burned as well. But over here, in this case, chisha b'shas chat avoda, he's actually having an intention, a pigul intention during half of the avoda, meaning one of the lambs could go in shchitas echad min hakvasim while he's slaughtering one of the lambs, and so therefore, again, that is different. In our case over here, by the case of the lambs, that is a classic case of mefaglan b'chatzi matir. He's having that pigul intention during the slaughtering of only one of the 2 lambs, again, which is chatzi matir, that's one of the matirs. But again, in the case earlier, the case was he's having that intention during the kometz, which is a full unit of avoda. He's just having an intention about that he's going to consume by chatzi matir. He's going to consume just the kometz outside the proper time, and so there everyone will agree that it will be pigul. And the Gemara continues and asks, if so, if the Bryce is just excluding the opinion of Rabbi Meir who says mefaglan b'chatzi matir, so my liolam, what's the language of the Bryce liolam? Again, the language of the Bryce was liolam ein bokares at sheyafagel b'shtein b'kazayis. It sounds like we're excluding more than just one opinion. We're saying more than simply ein mefaglan b'chatzi matir. As the Gemara now continues and explains, yamrit b'shlama b'shtein uv'shnein. If you're going to say correctly that the Bryce means b'shtein and b'shnein, again it means both of them refer referring to both of the animals and referring to both of the loaves. For Rabbi Yossi, who lafuke mid Rabbi Meir mid Rabbanan kaasi, and the brisa is Rabbi Yossi, and it's excluding both of the positions of Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanan. So hainu dekamar liolam. That would make sense that it says liolam. We're taking this position against Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanan. Ela yamrin Rabbanan. But if you're going to say that the brisa is the Rabbanan who lafuke mid Rabbi Meir, and we're just excluding the opinion of Rabbi Meir, my liolam. What does it mean liolam? Why does the brisa use that term? And the Gemara continues v'yod, and further we have the following question against Rav Huna's understanding of Rabbi Yossi. Ha'amar Rav Ashi, but Rav Ashi said, Tashma, come here the following proof from a brisa. The brisa says, Rebbe Omer, Rebbe says, some have the gears of Rebbe Lozer Omer, Rebbe Lozer says, Mishum Rebbe Yossi, in the name of Rebbe Yossi, Pigel Bedavar Hanasa Bachutz Pigel, if it's Pigel in something that's done outside the Mikdash, meaning in the Azara, that's Pigel. But Bedavar Hanasa Bifnim, but something done in the Mikdash, lo Pigel, that is not going to be Pigel. And the brisa explains, Ketzad, how so? Hayomid Bachutz, if he's standing Bachutz, meaning he's in the Azara, V'yomer, and he says, Harini Shochet al Menas, Lahazos Midamo Lamacher, I'm going to slaughter with the intention of sprinkling the blood tomorrow, and that's talking about in the mikdash by the inner chatos, lo pigel, then it's not going to be pigel. Shemachshava bechutz, because that's an intention outside the mikdash, but bedover hanasa bifnim, by something that is done in the mikdash. Hayomid bifnim, let's say he's standing in the mikdash. V'yomer, and he says, hareini maz, I'm sprinkling al manas lahakter emur in lamacher, with the intention of burning the emur in the sacrificial portions tomorrow outside the proper time. V'lishboch shirayim lamacher, and to pour the remnant blood tomorrow, lo pigel, that's also not pigel, shemachshava bifnim, because the intent is taking place in the mikdash, bedavar hanasa bachutz, by something that is going to be done outside the mikdash in the azara. But in the following case, hayomid bachutz, if he's standing outside the mikdash in the azara, v'yomer, he says, harini shochet, I'm slaughtering amanas lishboch shirayim lamacher, with the intention of pouring the remnant blood tomorrow, lahakter emur in lamacher, and to burn the sacrificial portions tomorrow, pigel, then that is an example of pigel, shemachshava bachutz, bedavar hanasa bachutz, because that's an intention outside the mikdash with regards to an action that's taking place outside the mikdash. And the Gemara now continues and analyzes the brisa lishboch shirayim lifgule mai. So he's having an intention again to pour the remnant blood tomorrow, but what's going to become pigel in that situation? Ilema lifgule dam. If you're going to say it's to make the blood pigel, dam mi mifkal, does the blood become pigel? V'atanan, but we learned in a Mishnah Meseches Zvachim, elu devarim she'ein chayav and aleim mishum pigel. The following: there's no liability for pigel. Hakometz v'halavona v'haketores uminchas kohanim uminchas nesachim uminchas koin mashiach v'adam. All of these are things with no liability of pigel. That's the kometz, the fistful, the lavona, the frankincense, the ketores, the incense, the carbon mincha of kohanim, the carbon minchas nesachim, which is the mincha that accompanies an animal carbon together with libations, the mincha of the kohen gadol, and dam. By blood, there's no liability. So clearly, it's not the blood which is pigel. Elapshita, rather, it is obvious. Lif gule basar, obviously, it's the meat that's becoming pigel. And apparently, that's what Rabbi Yossi is saying over here. That when it comes to an intention about pouring the remnant blood, the meat can become pigel. And so hashta now, if over there, to lo chashav basar gufi, there's not any intention at all with regards to the meat. And Amar Rabbi Yossi mifkal, Rabbi Yossi says it becomes pigel. So hacha over here in this case, again, when you have a right thigh and a left thigh, to chashav bezevach gufi, where he's having the intention on the carbon itself, lo kol shagain, isn't it obvious? Isn't it certainly true? The pigel b'yerech yamin, pigel b'yerech small, that the intention of pigel on the right thigh will create pigel on the left thigh. And the Gemara continues v'yod, and further another question against Rav Huna ha'amar Ravina, but Ravina said, Tashma, come in here, the following proof from the Mishnah earlier, hakometz asa mincha, if somebody takes the kamitza of a carbon mincha, the fistful le'echol shirea, in order to eat the remnant of the mincha, or lahakter komtza lamacher, or to burn the kometz tomorrow, moder Rabbi Yossi, bazur Rabbi Yossi admits in this case, shepigel, that it is pigel, v'chayav all of kares, and there's a liability of kares, and so again, lahakter komtza lifgule mai, he's burning the kometz, but what's the intention? What's being made pigel over here? Ilema lefgule kometz, if we're going to say that the kometz is becoming the pigel, kometz mi mifkal, again the same question, does the kometz become pigel? V'atanan, but again we learned in the Mishnah in Zvachim that we just quoted, elu dvarim shein chayovin alein misham pigel hakometz v'chulu, the following things there's no liability of pigel and the kometz was included. So elab shita, rather isn't it obvious that what the Mishnah means is we're talking about lahaktir komsa lamacher lifgule shirayim, that the remnant, the remainder of the carbon mincha will become pigel. Hashta now, again, if he had no intention in the shirayim itself and it becomes pigel, the same kind of question, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yudalid Amid Beis.